Tens of thousands of football fans came to Highbury. Electrifying!
Yes, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cannon Podcast. I am here with my boy, my friend, my fellow nerd, Mr. Rohan Jivan. How are you, good sir?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. I've had a nice, chilled weekend. A lot of successful hate watching. Starting off with Man City. And by the way, I tweeted it out on Saturday. I kind of feel this season the biggest difference in how teams kind of face Man City is just they're not afraid. They're really they're willing to go and outrun them, and they back themselves physically. And I think that's been the consistent theme that we've seen this season of them. So that was successful, the Brighton game. Then I wanted Newcastle to win, personally. I'm not really bothered about the narratives on social media and how Newcastle have become this annoying team. I didn't want them to win because I felt they performed very well against us. So, you know, they played really well against Liverpool as well. They deserved it, so I was happy with that. Tottenham have lost 15 Premier League games, George. 15.
That's mad.
15.
That's
so that
insane.
Was another successful result. And in our game.
When you think about it, right? Okay, so the tough thing with me and the Tottenham Hotspur whole part of it is I understand on a non-geographical level, you've got to hate them, but I find them so far in my rear, legitimately, that I've never grown up in my lifetime of them being relevant, genuinely. And so I know that there's a geographical hate, but for me, mate, when we beat Chelsea, I get a buzz. I don't know about you. There's a little bit of a recent hate there. There's the United and Chelsea for me are the ones where just stick it in my veins and continue to do. You deserve everything, you nasty, devilish club. You deserve all of this hate. And you know what? I think the Liverpool thing, it's starting to get to me, mate. Liverpool fans,
really?
From the outside, you've got to tell me, but they seem like the most annoying fan base as far as taking things personal to their team. And they've got this reputation, I feel like, for it online, but I just think it's creeping in. There's real insecurity in everything that's being done. And the whole thing of Jamie Carragher having to sit through that freaking Alexander Isaac interview, seething, fake smiling, was everything to me.
Oh, mate. You know, when he was in the crowd for the PSG game, that was brilliant. I loved that. Absolutely loved that. I can't stand him. But I think with Liverpool, I do agree, on social media, I put a tweet out the other day that was literally just about Arsenal, and there's so many Liverpool fans that think, why are you here? What are you doing?
Exactly.
So I do get that, although I'm not too fussed about Liverpool. And that's why. So did you want Liverpool to lose as well?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I did. I'm kind of a thing where and you know what, kind of low key, I also want to test this trophy logic theory. And you know what? Maybe we'll get into it in the pod, but the whole Alexander Isaac situation is going to be, given what's happened, I'm sure you saw the Fabrizio Romano links about him being the top target for Arsenal, and it's getting to a point where we've had so many links in the past, but I think even the tier one, so to speak, are along that path as far as Arsenal are there, Liverpool are there. And I would love to have a real life example, present modern day example of the trophy logic. So for me, it was I needed Newcastle to win. Now I would love to see the Liverpool Arsenal battle it out along with Newcastle, who have the ambitious owners who have just won a trophy. And I would love to see how that saga plays out in the modern era, because personally, I don't feel it's as normal as what we like to peddle on the narrative front with that. I think it's great for, players to win trophies, no doubt. But I do think the legacy of the club that you're at is really important as far as how they feel that they're remembered. And when we start doing, the big debates and we start talking about who's the best in their position in the world and who was the best down the line, right? I think there's a certain charm to doing it for a club that you've been at your whole time if you want to Harry Kane it. But I maintain that moving and going to a prestigious club, the trophy will always mean more. Unless you have maybe a geographical connection like a Trent or a homeschool boy winning it for your club, that's the only time where you can almost Steven Gerrard a career. And even then, it's an outlier. I think most players look back on their career as not just what I've won, but who I've won it with. And the manner in which I've won it is a big part of how they want their legacy to potentially be. Where do you stand on, Liverpool potentially bottling 3 cup competitions? In the span of a month, they went from quadruples on to out of the Champions League, out of the Carabao Cup final. And of course, they're going to do something that we all think in the league. But where do you stand on maybe the whole trophy logic of it all, this Alexander Isak cycle, and maybe how Liverpool, who for me, underhandedly have a huge rebuild coming, and no one is talking about it. The crap that Arsenal got from the Ozil Sanchez situations to sit there and have Virgil van Dijk, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Mohamed Salah, and by the way, Ibrahim Konate in the last year of his contract, all significantly linked and unknown futures going into the last 2 months of the season. Okay, it's great, but how do you feel about contextualizing that and people being okay with that? And the entire trophy logic of maybe how players would view projects in the future.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like, I think just looking at the game yesterday, and it gave people an idea, well, sort of an idea of what Liverpool would look like without Trent Alexander-Arnold. And I tweeted on it after the game, like, this Liverpool team, they are lacking in ideas. You know, they played the game that Newcastle wanted, which is exactly what Arsenal did against Newcastle, and Newcastle loved that type of fight. When you are able to go physical versus physical against Newcastle and you play into that game, they love it. They absolutely love it, and that's where it's the second balls, it's the long balls, it's the stop-starts to ruin momentum, indirect free kicks, set pieces. They relish it, and they love that sort of chaos. And Liverpool have been very good against these types of teams, generally, these physical mid-blocks, because they've got players like Trent Alexander-Arnold who are fantastic generational passers outside the block, being able to receive facing play and playing those balls in behind for a Salah to latch onto. And they didn't have that. And it felt like they were lacking a lot of guile, innovation, creativity. And that's just a little bit of an insight into how impactful Trent is to that team. And then you've got the other situations. Yeah. Go for it.
Okay, I want to spin off and maybe help you complete a thought too as well, because this is the first time that maybe Arne Slot had to, in unideal situations, adapt.
Yeah.
Where he's got a lot of praise for how he's platformed Mohamed Salah, and I think it's deserved, by the way. It's not that everything that he's done was poor. Like, it's absolutely been a case where this season, Salah's having a freak season in part to the way that Arne Slot has been able to platform his team around him. But I kind of make this point because I saw the same thing, in which I have seen an Arne Slot in recent weeks who has made some pretty basic tactical errors as far as the amount of people receiving between the lines. And I think his use of Harvey Elliott in that team in the last, I'd say, 4 to 6 weeks has been something that they're missing, has been something that he's mismanaged. And I think it comes down from, again, a little bit of playing in unideal circumstances. You talk about what it looks like without a Trent in that team. What does Arne Slot look like in unideal situations? Because we've been judging Mikel on that for the last 3-4 years. And he's got an expectation in which you must deliver at this point. But it comes down to, this is going to be the constant debate if Arne Slot is able to do this in the first year. But I have evidence in the last 4 to 6 weeks that I feel as though his tactical innovation in unideal circumstances is still something that I think he's developing, which, by the way, it's okay. Like, every coach will have that. But I just don't like the idea that Arne Slot has been perfect. Mikel hasn't, and he deserves this bottling tag in which he's constantly had to almost fight for relevancy in global media, and no one has ever really accepted him because, to me, he didn't deserve it, according to them. Yeah. And, you know, they don't want that praise because they don't want Arsenal to be the reference for a rebuild. They absolutely, like, the media don't want that. Nobody wants that. And I think that's that's led to a lot of the anxiety. And I just don't know how you feel in that game. Like, do you feel like the Harvey Elliott of it all, and maybe the point between the lines, and how Arne Slot is maybe developing without a plan? Like, look at PSG. I mean, they've gone into a very different game state there in which they're no longer the aggressors. They had tons of transitions. And to me, they weren't defending their box very well. They're relying on individual moments in terms of Konate and Virgil van Dijk doing brilliantly. But again, that's not a system. That's not you maintaining compact distances between the lines. That's not you organizing a sufficient press in that way. Now, you don't have to win in that way all the time. But if I'm just trying to see if we're going to be fair and critique Mikel for these things.
Yeah, exactly.
Where do you feel in the last 4 to 6 weeks? Does it answer any questions? Is it too early? Is it fair? The rhetoric maybe I'm bringing. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, you know, as you alluded to, we have to give him a lot of credit in terms of how he's platformed Salah. And football can be a very basic sport when you are able to look at a set of players. Who are your best players? and we need to get the best out of them. And he's extracted that level of quality out of Mohamed Salah. I mean, a big difference between Arne Slot and Arteta in terms of wingers, right? And we could go into this eventually in the Chelsea game in terms of how we were able to suffer and control that game without the ball, particularly in the second half. In that, when a team pushes their fullback forward, let's say it's the left back, right, and they're looking to overload Liverpool's right-hand side, Arsenal under Mikel will ask the winger to come back in order to deny them that numerical superiority. Whereas Arne Slot has effectively said, we'll allow you to have that overload. There's a really good example of the game against Aston Villa, and I think it's Ollie Watkins' goal just before half-time, in which it comes from an overload that Aston Villa have, and they latch onto it. Because Salah is high, and he's pinning high, and he is that threat in transition to give them that outball. Now, that led them to conceding a goal in that moment, but they will happily accept that because of the quality in transition of Salah's starting position. So there's a big difference there in terms of how Mikel sees the game and how Arne Slot sees the game in reference to a Salah and in reference to a Saka, let's say. Mikel doesn't want to give that advantage to the opposition when we're defending deep. He wants to deny that, whereas Arne Slot is going to be a little bit more... He's going to be more okay with that, keeping Salah high. But I think with Liverpool under Arne Slot, they do not change their team at all, barely, through game after game after game. He loves that continuity. So there is a really good argument to suggest that when he isn't got certain players available, like a Gakpo, they've missed Gakpo a lot recently, and his form. And I was surprised that he was on the bench. Perhaps he was still coming back from his injury. But there is an argument in which, under unfavourable circumstances, can Arne Slot extract that same level of quality and keep this team competitive at the top level? He's done fantastic in the Premier League. He has. But I really do think that there is a lot of... I don't think there's enough recognition of what Mohamed Salah is doing, as an individual. Yes, he's platforming him and he's doing really well there. And yes, quality, I've mentioned it many times in this podcast, is the biggest driver as to achieving those big honours, the Premier Leagues and the Champions Leagues, etc. But the level of individual quality that Mohamed Salah is giving right now is unprecedented, and this is what I really want to reiterate. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe this is a good transition into the Chelsea game. Why? Because Chelsea were left with, again, also an 11 that they were forced to adapt to injury as well, right? And, you're having a look at Cole Palmer. Is he ducking? Haha. But in general, you're looking at another coach that has come in with another rebuild. And is being asked to maintain his principles of play. And the one thing that, I'm really proud of Mikel for this year, I haven't agreed with all of his decisions. Our principles of play haven't suffered. The non-negotiables as far as who this team is, I still recognize them. Whereas I feel that other managers within this league that have been forced into alterations, for example, Cole Palmer, and I look at this Chelsea side, and let's just talk about that first half and that start. Mate, I thought we were all over them. There was an incredible amount of dominance that, Mikel was able to do. And for the first time, mate, I really saw a press of a man-to-man. I don't know if it's because Chelsea is a side that Mikel really hates, but his record against Chelsea is top. And I had a look at what Maresca was doing, and this change to put Reece James in the 6 was something that I am boggled by.
He's been doing it regularly, George. Genuinely, it's baffling me.
Yeah. You have one of the biggest outside threats in world football, and you're going to put him to dictate the tempo of a game. If you got Romeo Lavia on the bench, who again is clearly working his way back from fitness, but I think when I had a look at this game, mate, it was actually the first time I'm going to have maybe an unsung hero in Mikel Merino, and I wanted to talk about our press because I feel that was the first thing that I saw in this game was a Martin Odegaard that was confident in this role. I think in the first minute, he has some flicks, which maybe we'll talk about, that kind of annoy me, but it was a confident and it was a plan to go forward. But the one thing I felt that there was just a serious amount of emphasis placed on the press, on working hard. I think I was listening to commentary and there was a point about 25 minutes in that Arsenal had already ran more than 3 kilometers than Chelsea had, and it was us dominating. So this wasn't just a case of, Arsenal having possession in which, the field was shorter. It was us just working harder than the opposition, and we don't get enough credit for it. And I think it was the centerpiece of what made us start so fast, maybe we'll have to talk about some of the final third issues that I felt we definitely did have. There was 3 chances that we've actually crafted in the ode zone, I would call it, in terms of our ability to release people wide. And we had some brilliant opportunities, I think, from balls in the box that on another day, this should have been a 3-4-0 with some serious clinical edge, because we were due more than the 1-0 header that we got from Marino. But I thought Marino's movement was brilliant in the press. It was actually the one thing I noted in my notes where I said, I literally wrote this question: is he understanding the pressing triggers now? ? Because I think that as far as what he was able to do, he did the Kai Havertz role of shepherding to the side much better. And I saw him involved in the game a little bit more. I think there were too many times in previous weeks where Mikel Merino has felt like, okay, yes, he is a striker, but we're playing with 10 men. There's no reference there. And as far as the press goes, he's running. It's not that he's not working hard, but it's not leading to any turnovers, and it's wasted running, and then he gets tired later in games. I think this was the first time I really felt Mikel Merino take a more active role in the press, and it meant that Martin Odegaard almost recognized that and felt had to have like a little bit more freedom. But those were my initial thoughts on like the first half. What did you make of the first half? And I want to give you a Urian Timber-sized bone to really go off, because I think that is a player that had a phenomenal game.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. In terms of that first 30 minutes, I was really happy with what I was seeing, both in and out of possession. I think the pressing as well. I think with Merino, it's a case of like, when we've seen him this season, whether it's in midfield or up front, I don't think he's been consistent in the press in terms of backing the team up. And I think that is down on the complexity of the role, and it takes time to being able to be bed into that system and knowing when to go and when not to go. And I agree. I think the way that we press, there's a lot of different things that dictate in terms of what we do. Like, I remember when we played Wolves, and when we went down to 10 men, in the second half, we didn't press to force the goalkeeper to move towards his left-hand side. We pressed the other way because we wanted to deny Aït-Nouri and Cunha from getting on the ball as much as possible. If we keep it towards our left-hand side and away from their left-hand side, it meant that they wouldn't be able to be as dangerous in those situations further forward. So we tweaked our press there. And we tweaked our press in many different games as well. And that's why I think what you mentioned in terms of the principles and out of possession in our press, the level of flexibility and the way that we're able to adapt is ridiculously good. And I'll maintain that. What follows in terms of the transitions that we generate after winning the ball back, that's a different story. And that is something that Arsenal needs to improve on. There's things we can do internally, but the biggest driver is obviously the quality that we can bring through the door. But I think what I really liked about our first half was, on the ball, I really liked the way that we kind of dismantled Chelsea's block with some of the rotations that we saw in the middle of the park. Like, Declan Rice has mentioned this before in an interview with The Athletic about Mikel loves these diagonal movements of the midfielders where they're running off each other. And what was happening is Chelsea is setting up in this 4-2-3-1 type press that they're looking to engage with their 2 pivot players being Caicedo and Reece James, who are man-marking Martin Odegaard. Caicedo's job and Reece James's job was Declan Rice. And Enzo was marking Thomas Partey. And then you had the wingers who were looking to kind of cover Timber and Mars Lewis-Skelly. So they're going really man-to-man here in the middle of the park. And what was happening was Declan Rice was drifting a lot towards the right-hand side to drag Reece James into that space. And then when he was doing that, Thomas Partey would actually move into the left half space that is now vacated, or Marino would drop into that space because that channel is now opened up because you've dragged Reece James away from the area that he is defending. And we saw that a lot, not just with Rice rotating, but also with Mars Lewis-Skelly coming in, Odegaard as well. And these diagonal movements were opening up the channels for us to play forward and into Marino, who then was doing well when he received it in that space. And I really liked that. The other thing I think we did well is the usage of Marino and his height. I think it's probably one of the best games that we've had this season. I
agree.
With Marino at centre forward, where we were kind of encouraging Chelsea to press onto us man for man. The moment Timber was pressed by Cucurella, who jumped, it then triggered Chelsea to go more man-to-man. And then we were going for these long balls, which we do normally, under David Raya. That is a staple to our game. And by keeping Marino just dropping deep and allowing Trossard to take on the last line or Declan Rice to take on the last line, it meant that Marino could pick up the second ball and then we would advance and then we would get into the final third. So I really like that. And my final bit on the first half was, and I think we should have a section in general on our right-hand side where I think we spoke about it post Manchester United in terms of Ethan Nwaneri and asking Ethan Nwaneri to be Saka when he is not Saka. You have to create an environment that allows him to flourish. He didn't have a good game last week, but you have to ask yourself, are we really doing the most to benefit Ethan Nwaneri in that sort of structure, in that sort of system? And I didn't think we did. But with Martinelli, I think we are tailoring more to his strengths when he's playing through the right-hand side, with Timber going higher and allowing Martinelli to come more inside, Ødegaard dropping outside the block as well. And I really like that rotation that we're seeing in the first half, especially when we had Saliba dropping really wide because Partey would drop into the back line or Ødegaard would drop into the back line. And what it was doing is it was encouraging Nkunku to jump on Saliba. And the moment Nkunku jumps on Saliba being the winger, that means Timber's now free. So if Timber finds the ball from Saliba, receives it, that means Cucurella then has to jump on Timber. And then that means Badiashile then has to jump on Martinelli. And we saw that in one of the moves. I think it was just before the corner that resulted in the winning goal, where we encouraged the jump from Nkunku to Saliba. Saliba manages to play a really nice pass into Timber. Timber then effectively attracts the attention of Cucurella, and then Badiashile has to come across, and then Martinelli spins off him. He comes inside and puts in a really good cutback, and we score from the eventual corner. So there were a lot of things I really did like in that first half.
There was a lot of, for me, the blindside underlap, both sides of the pitch working brilliantly. As far as us really looking to manage that space where we definitely, I buy that diagonal movement quite a bit, but I think for me was also to release a half space run. We found a weakness in between the fullback and the center back for Chelsea to mark. And I think it's because they look at Fofana and you look at Colwell, who are jumpy and reactive, front-footed defenders that just can't help but engage. And I think that Mikel wanted to have runners from deep explode through those areas and test that because they are super aggressive. And I think we've spotted a weakness because I don't think it was just, Yuri and Timber on the right, but even Trossard at moments, like in the first 2 minutes, that's what we do. We do a dismarking diagonal movement from the right to open space for Trossard to have I think it was Declan who received it in the first 2 minutes where Ødegaard has that shot in the top of the box from the left from a cutback. I think it was a preview of what was to come because we did that quite a bit. And even Yuri and Timber did the exact same thing in which we had some dismarking movements from the left where Trossard was a little bit wide. Martinelli, I think, carried the width, but Timber had this really, really purposeful run in between the center back and the fullback for cutbacks. And I think he had a very direct game in the final third, which was something that really made me happy because I think that's one of Timber's actual potential weaknesses in the final third. I think he is so technically brilliant. He has a tendency, we've talked about this before, to be more forward thinking in forward areas. But I think as far as his running power, what I don't understand is why we don't see some more of those wide overlaps with pace. Because he's got it. Like, it's not an athletic capability sense. And we actually see it when he's running back from goal on, breakaways, and he's able to cut out, transitions brilliantly. Like, it's insane the ground that he covers. And I think the intensity that he covers with it, those first 10 to 15 yards. And to me, he can do a bit better as far as his running is concerned. I don't worry about his passing because I find it progressive. And I think when he gets his head up, he's able to do it. But when he's on the run at times in the final third, he can get lulled into a sense of retain, regain kind of mentality in which, regain the ball, recycle to Martin Ødegaard. My job seems to be complete a little bit. But you have the capability to be a little bit more of an outside threat and even an underlapping threat. I just think in this game, he was able to really shine with that. And so, I think one last thing I wanted to say was there was that one video with Ola Aina from Nottingham Forest that was going around. Did you have a chance to see it?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
So just to kind of back up what you were saying about the diagonal movement, he was comparing, and for those that haven't seen it, I'll just really quickly describe. He was comparing the differences between basically playing Liverpool, Manchester City, and Arsenal. And of course, I will selectively hear what I want to hear, but he was talking about how Liverpool were incredibly direct as a team to play with. However, Arsenal in Manchester City, he feels, and Arsenal more so, are more difficult to play with because of the rotations they make within the game. He feels that, Manchester City are a much more possession-based side. And while Arsenal are that side, the amount of movement that they have makes it much more difficult to mark. Where he finds that with Manchester City, it's a little bit easier to mark them because they are a little bit more static in the way that they occupy positions, while still being a very possession-dominant team. a positional team, but nonetheless a possession dominant kind of mindset. And he equated that Arsenal were similar with that. Just everybody moves though, and it's so difficult to track because, people fill in zones that they weren't supposed to, and everybody knows where they are. And there's just a lot more dynamic movement within the positional model that Arsenal have. And it comes down for me from those diagonal dismarking jobs that you're really talking about, right? And that's how it creates space where it's not just always Timber on the underlap that has space. It could be Martinelli, it could be, Trossard. There's a really high level of understanding for creating space into zones. And I think that's the one thing I loved, because I wasn't able to really comment on the United game. But for me, the one thing that frustrated me was we were too static in the United game, generally speaking, especially off the ball for me. I think this game I saw big intent to keep moving, make sure that the movement off the ball was dynamic to create space between center back and full back. And it resulted in, I think, a very dominant first half that personally, mate, I don't know about you, it seemed like one of the better Arsenal performances this season. That first 30 minutes was really good.
Do you know what it is as well with that online interview? And it kind of like reiterates the fact that, when we look at structures and how teams set up, there's a lot of familiarity when you go throughout the entirety of the league. But what separates the teams is their intentions and what they're looking to do. And he said it, Liverpool, it's like 2-3 passes and boom, they're in your box. That is how direct they are. And that is very difficult to defend against. But when you looked at Man City, it was kind of like saying, you can see the whole game in front of you. It's difficult, but you can get a breather because you can see everything. With Arsenal, and it's a case of what Declan Rice said in The Athletic previously, we're very much insistent on same side principles as well as the rotations, where we're looking to try and find a solution on that side. Keep working it, keep moving it, and it's like, Arsenal play a couple of 1-2s here, then they'll go over the top, and then they'll recycle it again, and they'll go again as well. That becomes very difficult for a defence to defend against, especially for Ola Aina being on that side, because especially with Arsenal being right-sided dominant and Ola Aina being on that side as well. I think in the game at the Emirates earlier this season, although it might have been Williams, but yeah, I think that it just shows the different intents that teams have. And I also think this is also a criticism that I have of Mikel in terms of not getting the not platforming certain players and putting them in positions that I don't think that maximises their strengths, like the way that we used Ethan Nwaneri against Manchester United. But I think with Martinelli, he's not siloed him or isolated him in the way that we do with Saka, because he's recognising the fact that Martinelli isn't that type of player through the right-hand side. And I remember it was the interview after the Ipswich game. I don't know if you remember, it was the first half. We very much played in a way in which we're kind of like overloading, underloading. We're switching it to Martinelli, and then we're looking for him to perform the same type of action that Saka does. But you can't do that. You need to have more combinations in and around that area in which we're not switching it and looking to isolate him. We're looking to get him combining with other players and getting him in the box. And I really like that we're doing that with Martinelli. I mean, Declan Rice, we'll probably get into it. I still feel frustrated with the way that we use him personally, George. And I know we share very similar thoughts on this, where I think Declan Rice had a fantastic game. He always does. It's very rare. The only bad game Declan Rice for me has had this season, and probably his worst in his Arsenal career, was the game against West Ham. That's it. Yeah. But Declan Rice is a phenomenal player. He has been fantastic since, I would say, Chelsea away, which was just before the international break. Since then, he has been hands down Arsenal's best midfielder. Fantastic performances. But I still feel predominantly the way that we use him through the left-hand side, it doesn't maximise his strengths on the ball. I completely get it in terms of the press out of possession. We speak about it so... I don't think anyone speaks about it more than we do, about the press. But on the ball, he can be fantastic. We can praise him, but at the same time, we can be frustrated with the way that we use him. That's certainly how I feel. Both aren't mutually exclusive. Both can happen at the same time. And I don't know what your thoughts on that were.
It's more of a praise on Declan as his ability than it is necessarily a critique of anything he is, right? And I think when I have a look at Declan and, in our rotation that he's in the left half space, maybe more towards the touchline, and we're working our way through build up. And he receives the ball and he has this almost, okay, who's in front of me? Where is the movement? And the way he receives is not to drive forward like an 8 would. It is to open up, okay, where's my diagonal? Where's my options? And it's just because, for me, that is his normal intent. When he receives, he's not looking at the space, he's looking at the game. And he's a quarterback in that way. And I feel it's just a very different intent. When you look at Miles Lewis-Skelly, for example, though, when he receives, his focus is, by the way, I don't even think it's on space necessarily. It's on the ball.
Yeah.
It's on dribbling and creating space in dribble and creating space in that separation. And I just think that when you have a Miles Lewis-Skelly like this, and we've had some links that talked about how Ethan and Miles have really changed the squad building sense. I hope that's more down the line to recruit to a sense that we've got Miles a little bit higher and Declan deeper. I hope that's the difference that we make, because as far as preferential zones, that for me is the next big switch that I'm looking to make along with the Ethan. Like when you talk about it, right? I think what made this Chelsea performance pop is, again, the right wing role between Ethan and Martinelli. If you want it touchline, play Martinelli with a Timber. If you're going to bring in an Ethan, make Ben White the fullback pairing. When you're talking about the left and you're talking about some kind of additional movement that we might need, if you're going to play a Miles Lewis-Skelly and have Declan Rice deeper, play a Calafiori for some running width on the outside. Play one of those, and then let your left wing be whoever you would like. But as far as making sure that we've got a complement, there is going to be at least a question mark for me in the summer of I hope Mikel does it right more often. I feel like that's the next stage of his development personally as a coach, that I feel he knows the solutions, because, mate, he goes from United to this. And it's beautiful. And it's beautiful to see the rotations are top. The team is performing at a really good level because the balance is right in the final third. And I think I sympathize for him not having the pieces. However, just like when we talk about Declan, what is his best use? Do you ultimately want Declan in possession to be somebody ahead of the ball receiving? That needs to be a question that we need to ask. And personally, I don't agree with that. Yeah. And I've got players now that we do have that are answering those questions. And so it's either a case of, okay, get rid of the players that you're not using in that role and buy something you trust, or accept and don't try to make something out of somebody that will be good, but ultimately for overall balance purposes might be worse for the team. And when I'm looking at like a Zubamendi and how that works, there's so many questions that I've got, mate, because that first half I found Martin Odegaard deep quite a bit in terms of him helping and build up. And the times I thought he was actually really direct in the first 5-10 minutes, and I don't know about you, something happened and that really tailed off as far as his involvement in the final third. I felt as though that he started moving deeper and deeper as the game went on. And this is something that maybe I'll ask you as a question. Can you change a player's natural instinct, in your opinion? Where what I'm getting at is, if Martin Odegaard's natural instinct is to go to the ball and get touches, which is his natural instinct, it's always to go to ball, right? And you've got Declan Rice. What's his natural instinct? Is his natural instinct to receive in the pockets, or is it that to go to ball? So it's a case of, okay, how many players, and what's better for a coach to do? Should he respect the Ancelotti-ness of coaching, in which balance dictates what are the natural instincts of the players I'm doing? Or is the positional play model inherently opposing the innate skill of some players, in which an Ethan should just perform? He should do better with what he's got at Manchester United, and we should be critiquing that. Where do you stand on what you would like to see improved? Maybe not critique, but where would you like to see the team evolve to?
I think so. It seems very evident that Zubamendi's going to come through the door, And I've mentioned it many times. Like, I like the player, I don't love the player, but I think for me, the type of player he is gives me confidence that we're going to use Declan Rice in the way that I would like. That gives me a lot of confidence, because Declan Rice is your £100 million signing. You have to build this team around that type of play. You absolutely have to when you spend that sort of money. And then it puts Martin Odegaard in a very difficult situation, because I actually think there's a lot of similarities with his Man United and his Chelsea performances, where first half, thought he looked really good. Second half tails off, and you don't really see that influence and the impact that you want from a player of his quality. And the only way in which you can get both Martin Odegaard, and I agree, getting Martin Odegaard outside the block and coming deeper with his natural instinct being, I want to get on the ball. If I'm not involved in the game, I don't feel like I can impact it as much. So I come deeper and I look to receive so I can get touches on the ball. And you've got someone like Declan Rice there. The only way in which that is going to be able to function properly is if you have both your fullbacks going high, and you're going very much Liverpool-esque with the Wijnaldum, Henderson, and Fabinho type mold. Where you've got your three central midfielders deeper and you've got your fullbacks higher. That is something that you'd have to do. But for me, I don't want us to go that way. And I think for me, it's more a case of Martin Odegaard will need to adapt to the changing role. And that doesn't make me confident, personally. I think we had this conversation a few weeks ago, and I was hesitant about it because I don't think it's Martin Odegaard's best quality in terms of receiving inside the block, high between the lines, and then performing the final action. I don't think that is his best quality, despite the fact that his 22-23 season is his best goal-scoring, numbers-wise campaign at Arsenal. I don't think that is the best usage of him. But you are then putting yourself in a very uncomfortable situation of the Zubimendi signing. I actually think if Arsenal didn't sign Zubimendi and the idea is to have Declan Rice as your number 6, and then I think Martin Odegaard can work more in terms of dropping out, and then you push your left central midfielder higher inside the block. You can do that. But with Zubimendi coming in, I think it puts himself in a situation where he needs to adapt. And if he doesn't adapt, then I would like Mikel to be as ruthless as he has been with other players in terms of taking them out the firing line. I think he has done it before in the 21-22 season where Odegaard's form was off early in the campaign, and he went with Lacazette and Aubameyang. That is the last time we saw Odegaard taken out of the team through an actual tactical decision. And I think I'd like to see that consistency going into this following season as well.
Look, there's questions. I mean, in his last 5 games, Fabio Vieira's got 5 man-of-the-match performances, 3 goals and 2 assists. It's getting to a point where I kind of ask that, can you change a skill? Because we've got profiles that I don't think you can argue. Vieira, whether you believe in the talent or not, that is a profile of 10 that seems to be more amenable to the role. You've got Ethan Nwaneri, who as a profile seems more amenable to the role. And, you've got Max Dowman coming through, who is coming up quick and quicker than we think. In the next 18 months, that boy is an Arsenal starter, in my opinion. And you're looking at players that are coming through that are maybe more amenable to a role for a player that has defined us for so long. And it's going to be a question. I don't know where it goes. I'm not so much in the camp of I'm sure that he can't do it.
I agree.
I have doubts like you, but I do have a look at that Sociedad season, mate, and he performed a lot of the things that we were asking in terms of floating in and around Isaac. He needed a reference. He needed a physical reference to do that first contesting job. However, other than that, it was him and Isaac floating around, releasing Oyarzabal in that season. That dynamic really popped. And it was so weird, mate, because for me, I felt like that was his best season outside of Arsenal. But for Arsenal, his best season has been deeper and in deeper roles. And is that a league critique?
Do you think then, George,
or is that a player thing?
Yeah, sorry to cut in there, but do you think then with the Alexander Isak links, right? I don't think it will happen, personally. I don't see it happening. But it's very evident that Arsenal are massively in for him, and we really like the player. Why wouldn't you?
Who wouldn't?
Who wouldn't? Is there an element of that dynamic with Martin Odegaard that is in Mikel's mind as well, with an Isak and an Odegaard? Because it is that familiarity. We'll probably get into. We'll talk about Gabriel and Saliba, in terms of the chemistry they have developed and how consistent it is. But is there that element to it as well? I don't think. When we talk about Alexander Isak, we talk about the individual player and how brilliant he is.
Yep.
But I don't think there is much discourse on the relationship that he has with a Martin Odegaard as well. And maybe there's more into it in that aspect as well, which is interesting.
I agree. I've been really thinking about that. I get critique for being an Odegaard hater, and I've been trying to really make this make sense in my head, okay? And I do see a legitimate world in which that becomes a thing, mate. And I'm having a look at it. Zubimendi, by the way, was brought to elevate Declan Rice, not the other way around. And I do think that an Alexander Isak could be a way of elevating Martin Odegaard in terms of the role we want him to do. And if he's unable to do it, even with that previous relationship, that previous dynamic in a team that he's been captain of, then you almost give him a rope to hang himself with from a player perspective and an ability to do the role. So I agree with you. I think the Alexander Isak pursuit is, okay, he's a phenomenal player. He revolutionizes Arsenal's attack. He gives us things we don't have in attack individually. But from a chemistry perspective, like when people talk of Zubamendi, they talk about the partnership of Rice. They should be talking about the partnership with Odegaard. They really should. Because you're talking about two players who equally want the ball. But Isak, by the way, the way that he deals with contact, Isak, it's not somebody that's an Osimhen. It's not a target man necessarily. Like, I think, look at his battles with Saliba. It's intelligent movement that he gets ahead of the ball for dinks to spin. It's a slightly different thing, but regardless, he is able to turn long ball situations into moments of possession. He's able to bring it. It's not in the same way as maybe some other players. However, he consistently does that. And I feel if Martin Odegaard has another top technical passer, which Isaac is, and Isaac can be another top technician, does he feel the need to constantly involve himself in build-up where he feels, I've got this one theory. I think there's the physical aspect of him wanting to avoid the challenge, but also low-key, mate, does he trust the potential technical ability in the final third, or rather in build-up enough that he feels that he can be free in the final third? Because I look at that Sociedad season, and to be fair to him, he was a floating 10. He was going side to side. He was really next to Oyarzabal. He was really somebody. Isaac took over the left-hand side dynamic because he would swap. Oyarzabal would come into central areas. Isaac would go, and it was almost a two attacking midfielder system of Odegaard and Isaac that were feeding people. And when you have a look at it, the way Arsenal set up, their wingers are wide and looking to be fed. Right now, it's just Kai Havertz and Odegaard are the ones feeding them. But an Isaac and an Odegaard are very different. They're both quite complementary. Isaac's the runner, Odegaard's the passer. Yeah. It makes sense. I can see an argument for them to say, not only is £130 million going to help me with an attacking transformation, but it's going to help with a midfield transformation as well, looking at redefining an asset who we are in danger of, by the way, of potentially moving on with lowering value. Is there a way where we look at Martin Odegaard's season, and there is going to be relevant questions, right, after this, and saying, okay, we've got 2 seasons now where he's performed great, and a season where he's performed underperformed, I would say, this season, generally. Yeah. Is that a continuation? That's not a good place to be in for a £75 million asset that you've got tied on for 3 or 4 years. So ideally, you look to buy to increase the value, right? And I think the difficulty is Arsenal have the solutions in case it doesn't work to make it work. So I think the logic towards an Alexander-Isaac partnership, like you highlight, is really, really key.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more into that. There's this, and I think the point that you made, I actually think Alexander-Isak. Now, I watched a lot of him when Arsenal linked to him back in 2022. I really wanted us to go for him. It was the case of Vlahovic and Isak. I actually felt you get both of them early, you're going to reap the rewards from it. Alexander Isak and Vlahovic, they were like polarizing opposites in terms of their best qualities, where Isak has always been fantastic in deeper areas. He always has been in terms of receiving, taking on, and then bringing others into the game. He's been fantastic at that. But where Isak was lacking at Real Sociedad was his movement and his intelligence in box situations that he has developed fantastically now. Now, the game yesterday, he didn't physically dominate Virgil van Dijk because he knows he can't physically dominate Virgil van Dijk. But just look at the goal as the prime example. Virgil van Dijk thinks he's going to be dragging, Isak is going to be making that run, and he hangs deeper. But Isak just holds his position and he's there to receive and he finishes it. That's the intelligence of a player who knows where to be in box situations. And I do think, like, just as you were talking there, I think there could be a lot more into this with the Martin Odegaard thing. Like, just as we started speaking about this, and maybe that value of the 130, 40 million or whatever it will be, they're looking at it as thinking not just that in isolation as the player who Isak is and the output that he will inevitably get at Arsenal. You know, it's a certified bang in that sense. You know, whether you believe that it's the right thing to do in terms of spending that much money on a single player at this time is a different question. But if Alexander Isak comes through the door and he's fit for the whole season, he's the top scorer. He becomes the top scorer in the Premier League, you know, and rivals Haaland.
Absolutely. And you know what? I'll just end on this as food for thought for some viewers. This has been part of my calculus. Isaac, to me, regardless of how brilliant he is an overpay at 130 million. However, I asked the question, is 30 million pounds of an overpay worth the value depreciation that an Odegaard may face next season if he doesn't perform? So what I mean by that is a performing Odegaard, what value would you put at that? At least 75, 80 million?
85 million.
80.
Yeah.
Exactly, at the least, right?
Yeah.
I don't know about the current Odegaard, but if the current Odegaard plays like this next year as well, I think you're looking at a 50 or 55 million pound asset
It's
potentially.
a drop off. Yep.
And so the 30 million pound overpay, it equals out, and it equals its weight in gold, and it prioritizes a player in his prime. And by the way, getting Martin Odegaard back to that type of form with an Isak could be worth the calculus and the overpay. That could be part of the strategic thinking that we're seeing. But nonetheless, I do want to really touch on one part of the game, and mainly the second half. I wanted to ask you a couple questions. Arsenal sat back for me. I think it was instruction, personally. I don't know how you felt. I don't think this was a case of Chelsea forcing Arsenal back into a position. This was a case of Arsenal, for me, having done the job that they needed to do and recognize that Chelsea have an issue beating down low blocks, let alone without their best player in Cole Palmer to be able to do that. And I think it had the added benefit, by the way, of saving legs, personally. We had already expended quite a bit. I don't think that we ran as much as we could have at United, but there was a sense for me that Mikel is at this point, he got his goal, he got his early goal. Let's save the legs. We know, we've talked about this on the pod, this team has 60 minutes in its legs right now as we're trying to get the players that we need back, right? So were you upset with the mentality of it in terms of sitting back, not going for it a little bit more? Did you understand it? And I guess just to lastly talk about, I'll give you a chance to talk about Yuri and Timber there. How well did you think the defensive unit did? I mean, Mikel highlighted in his post-match about how well we defended. Yeah. Is this a case of you being on the ropes, or was this you controlling the game in a different way that nobody likes to say?
So we've mentioned it many times in terms of like inevitability in forward areas. There's an inevitability of Arsenal in terms of being able to suffer without the ball and being able to get over the line with the desired result. And we've done that time and time again. I'd say in terms of sitting back, I'd say it was more of a case, I'd say for the last 15/20 minutes. I don't think that was our intent throughout the entirety of the second half. I also think in the first half, they had that spell, that 10-minute spell where they really were having a lot of possession, Chelsea. I think it was 90-10 at some stage in that first half. But I think naturally also, teams will have their spell. You know, it's natural to happen. But I do think as we approach towards the latter stages of the second half, you saw a team that was more willing to suffer. And well, I'd say suffer. We didn't suffer, but, you know, suffering without the ball and not controlling the game with the ball. And I think Arsenal looked at it and thought, the way that Chelsea set up, their width holders are strong footers, Cucurella and Jadon Sancho, who were not able to create separation through the wide areas. And that limits them entirely, because even if they do go down the byline and they are able to get across him, they've got no reference in the box. They've got no height, no presence, no one crashing in those areas, and it became very comfortable. So I think it was very easy for Arsenal in that sense. And statistically, I think Scott Willis pointed out that Chelsea, I think, had 8 touches in the box in this game. That's their lowest in a Premier League game since 2017. You know, that is how dominant Arsenal were without the ball. And to then move into the Gabriel and the Saliba discussion, these two, we are so blessed to have them. They're like the quintessential example of a modern day centre back. You know, and I think Gabriel, right? When we look at signings in the Arteta era, and I think there's a lot of talk about opportunity cost with the Kai Havertz signing and how, you know, the value of the other player that was next available was really high, and that's affected what we've been able to do. I don't agree with that. I think Kai Havertz, I still sit in the camp. I think Kai Havertz has had really good performances for Arsenal, especially towards the back end of the last season and being our best attacker. But I think when we're looking at our most efficient signings in the Arteta era, Gabriel has to be the best one. In terms of the lowest opportunity cost, Gabriel has to be it. Because when we look at Gabriel right now, he is the best left-footed centre-back in the world. There's nobody better than him. And from where he was, diamond in the rough, to then consistently performing at a level that is title-worthy, alongside Saliba, in Gabriel's case, 2.5 years, it speaks volumes of just how much improvement he's made as an individual. He's always been a top player, but there was more we could extract from him. And that's down to the coaching, but also down to the individual. And he has formed a formidable partnership with Saliba. I think the injuries has certainly been something that has really hampered what we've been able to achieve in the league in terms of being able to go for the title. But one thing we have been blessed with is these two being able to be consistently available and to form this partnership in which cooperative superiority, the chemistry levels, it's the best in the league. And I think you wanted to talk about, where we see this in terms of a wider point of view.
Let's get into it, mate. Like wider topics. Let's talk best center back partners. Let's throw them up there. Let's just think.
Let's get rid of the trophy debate as well. Please, let's eliminate the trophy talk. Let's just talk pound for pound as a partnership, as a player, attributes, quality, just that. Forget about the trophies because if we bring that into it, they're not in any conversation because they haven't won anything yet.
And they're not even in a position to, by the way, because they're too young as well as a partnership. I mean, you're comparing these people at the end of their careers, so their story's not written. But okay, let's just start the easy one: Rio Ferdinand and Vidic. In every sense of the word, I've heard a lot of people actually compare them as a partnership because you've got they're both aggressive, but you've got the ball playing dominant player and the dueler.
Yeah, you've got the aggression of Vidic, and then you've got the passing of a Ferdinand, isn't it? So
yes, to me, mate, just gonna kind of flat out say it. It's not close.
Yeah, I agree.
For me, I was lucky enough to grow up watching those two.
Same.
And I think Rio Ferdinand is one of the more underrated center backs. I actually say, like when we talk best center backs in the Premier League, to me, he is one of the more underrated center backs that we look very ahead of his time. Him and David Luiz were two players that I just felt like were born in the wrong era. Like if they were born, yeah, 100%. But I have a look. So with them, mate, it's not close. It's not close for me.
Yeah, and again, ability as a partnership, ability-wise, I completely agree. Like,
yeah, and you know what? The tough thing is, I think the older center back partnerships actually faced potentially more individual talent, but the teams weren't the same. So I mean, like what I mean by that is, I think they maybe faced more greats of the Premier League era from an individual standpoint. So like you had more Cantonas, you had more Henrys, you had more, I think, one-man shows. I think modern football right now, very rare, is a one-man show. It is becoming a lot more positional based, which implies a team-based tactic. But I don't know, maybe for you, mate, like what are some top center back partnerships that you would say? I mean, you got your John Terry
and
your Cahill.
John Terry and your Cavaliers.
Yeah. So with that,
because that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's a team that has conceded the fewest goals in Premier League history, isn't it? And I don't think that will be matched ever, personally. I think they've conceded 12 goals or 14 goals?
Was it? I thought. Well, I don't know why. I feel like it was 15. I could be totally off. Somebody in the comments will correct us, but it was very low for sure. And I agree with you. I don't know if the modern game allows for that to be met. Mate. Like it's potentially the closest one. Again, this could be bias talking. I just have the athletic potential of Saliba and Gabriel together. Yeah. That's the thing. Like I look at some players and you can make an argument for at this point in their career. One is maybe like John Terry at his peak and at his core could be better than Gabriel, but he's not better than what Gabriel does or what Carvalho does for that partnership. Yeah. And so it's like there is definitely on an individual basis, I find differences that you can make the argument for. But when I come back, mate, these are elite physical talents that have the brain and the brawn prototypes with them. They both have their strengths, but these are both two unbelievable partnerships. And I think I'm trying to struggle of another world partnership that I felt like had that.
Because it's like, right, so like Terry and Carvalho, you ask them, obviously there's far more improvements in terms of dietary, nutrition, sports science, everything if they were in today's game. But you can't change a person as well of who they are. As like, you ask them to play the way that football is played now, they would struggle more than a Gabriel and a Saliba, whereas I think a Gabriel and a Saliba as a partnership in that era would thrive as well. This is the thing. I think Gabriel and Saliba thrive in any era. That's the way I look at it. And that's why I think for me, I've said it many times, like it's a partnership that I've never seen this at Arsenal. Never. I didn't manage to catch the Invincibles in terms of watching live. I watched a lot of the footage though, and in terms of attributes and individuals, I'm going for Gabriel and Saliba.
So Sol and Kolo Toure for me have the best potential to rival the athleticism.
Yeah.
But I don't think they're aerially as strong as the duo together in the air. And I also don't think that they come near on the ball as well. They were very good, but the difference in the ball, and this is part of the problem, mate, I'm struggling personally, and I don't know if this is biased. Can you think of a center back partnership in your time in the last 15, 20 years that you feel has come close to the potential of quality that you see with a Gabriel and Saliba? I mean, Bonucci and Chiellini is maybe something that you can have a look at, but again, I question the athleticism of the pair together. I'm trying to think back of some of the best teams, and I'm trying to think of some of those. There was individuals that shone, but is there a partnership that has shone together as much as these two have?
What was that What was that Inter one? Lucio and...
There was Lucio and...
Cannavaro.
Oh, gosh. Cannavaro. Well, monsters.
Yeah, that was a monster partnership.
But again, that one felt very aggressive. Do you feel that they have the culture on the ball that both of these two, certainly maybe over Gabriel, but with Saliba?
Maybe my bias. I don't know if I'm doing them a disservice, but yeah. But I mean, we're talking about some of the great partnerships here, aren't we?
And if they do, I'm okay to have it. I don't think it's a ridiculous statement to make, but I think I make this question just to maybe spark thought, and we will have to transition to some questions there. Maybe you guys in the comments have a think of your world center back pairing, and where do you rank Saliba and Gabriel as far as their current quality? When we're talking about trophies,
abilities, forget about the trophy stuff. And this is
the
where
trophy
I don't want
argument.
It to be. Yeah, the comments of but they won trophy. No, forget about that. Fine if you believe another partnership like a Vidic or Ferdinand better quality. Well, if you want to make that argument, cool, but don't bring trophies into it. Can I just say quickly before we go to the questions, we haven't spoken on him enough, I think. Jurrien Timber, for me, hands down my man of the match. And fantastic. Intensity is what epitomizes him. The way that he padlocks that right-hand side consistently, he needs to get a shout out here. And I think, for me, he is the best 1v1 fullback I've seen at Arsenal since Ashley Cole. And I'll maintain that. I think Bakary Sagna is the one who can rival him. Tomiyasu, people say, is another shout-out, but I don't think Tomiyasu is better 1v1 than a Jurrien Timber, personally.
I thought Sagna has maybe the closest shout.
Yeah.
But I still think Jurrien Timber is better because I actually think Jurrien Timber... I think Sagna has better crossing from wide areas.
And Sagna was also a beast aerially as well. He was a monster in the air.
Very, very good. Very strong in the air. But I think as far as what you make on 1v1 lock jobs, I don't know, mate. Yeah, I agree with you. And you know what? I'd even argue, he can chat to Ashley Cole in 1v1s specifically. I think Ashley Cole was a freak in the other end of the pitch, so that's why the ceiling is a little bit crazy. But as far as defensive ability, I rate Timber incredibly highly 1v1. There's very rare. Let's put it this way. I have, for me, a confidence that when I go into Vinicius Jr., I think this is going to be a huge talking point in Madrid, by the way, personally. Yeah. And I think Miles Lewis-Skelly, by the way, as far as dealing with the Rodrigo and the Vinicius Jr. threat, we are going to have a fullback pairing that I think is the best in the world to combat. I don't know who's going to win, because for me, Madrid are the best attack in the world with the most juju in the world. That doesn't make sense.
They are the final boss.
They are the final boss. But Arsenal are the final boss defensively in the world. I don't rate anybody else higher than us defensively. And that includes Madrid, by the way, Atletico. I think we're a better defensive team than Atletico.
You got
Madrid.
Atletico, Inter, and Arsenal, really, isn't it? That's the teams you're looking at.
I think so. And I would rate us at least equal. At the very least, you're talking about kings of defense versus kings of attack. And I don't know who wins. Because also, by the way, Madrid have had issues against low blocks this season.
Yes.
In terms of what their season against Getafe, against some other teams. So
we should do a rewatch, George. We should do a rewatch on a Madrid game. I think we should do it during the international.
We should. I'm down for that. But listen, guys, if you got to this point in the pod, thank you so much for all your questions. We're going to be taking a couple of your questions right now. I've got a big one, actually, that I think has been coming up a little bit. So there's a lot of squad building questions, but I like this one in particular.
You love
from
this.
Theo
You got to
Whitstrom.
go first in this one. That's your.
Oh, I don't know though, mate. Like, okay, so is it a net positive from Theo or negative to prioritize Odegaard personalities? So not the player, but the personalities, who in this case are maybe less naturally gifted over Mavericks with a more difficult personality like a Duran or your Osimhen's. Do you think that this holds us back? And what do you think Andrea Berta and Mikel Arteta will do, given the fact that they've had emphasis on personality when signing players in the past? I think that's a very, very good question.
That's a great question.
Mate, I don't know the answer because on one hand, I sit there and I say that Arsenal need X factor, but the way in which we control games, I think is unique, personally. And it comes from that. As soon as you have somebody that's not willing to do it, it really does destroy the mentality of the collective doing it. And so it means that you're going to have to play a different way. And we've said this, by the way, before. By getting a Maverick, you will have to play a different way. And sometimes that's worth the risk. Now, I don't know because I have a look at it and just to my core, mate, I am a team man. Like that my coaching philosophy is controlling transitions, being a little bit more one to prioritize the out of possession. That's just what I've always enjoyed. And I'm not always right. That's just me. So when I have a look at it and I try to recruit, this is basically like, okay, do you recruit a Semenyo or a Leao? That's the player idea and hypothetical here. Okay, I'm just going to get off the fence. For me, I believe that we attack as a collective, we can win as a collective. I don't think that we're missing the individual. I've seen the individual in a Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang who was incredible, and what Mikel was able to do with that player. By the way, people forget, I mean, okay, it was difficult at the end, but him and Aubameyang thrived when he first came in. This wasn't a case of Mikel
and he also
not
improved
thriving with
Aubameyang
the
in terms of him dropping deep and his link play, especially towards the latter stages of his... Because Aubameyang has always been off on the shoulder, spinning off in behind, fantastic in the box and his movement there. But Aubameyang has always lacked the qualities in terms of coming deep and being able to recycle and bring others into the game. He improved significantly towards the latter stages of his Arsenal career in that aspect.
agree.
And I don't think people talk about that enough. That is something Mikel does a lot with the players in terms of that security when they come deep and they're able to kind of receive and then bring others into the game.
Which is why I love the Sesko. Like, I don't worry about the Sesko weakness of that currently.
Certified bang,
He's going to do that. So anyways, I want to give you a chance to do this. So basically, do you feel that this is a personality debate? Because to be fair, Berta has, I mean, there's been stuff that's come out, the whole Adrien Rabiot thing in which he's left when Kamara came in shorts. Berta is somebody that clearly prioritizes personality, and he's not afraid to make decisions about not pursuing. We know what Mikel is like as far as personalities go. I think it's a valid question, you know? You have a look at your Osimhen's. Yeah, like where do you stand on it? We're in this summer. Rohan, you're the sporting director. You're with Mikel and Berta. You know who these guys are. Do you feel that a Maverick is something that these guys need to change their personal beliefs for, like their mental beliefs for? Because I think we have technical and physical non-negotiables, but there's a certain cultural non-negotiable that Mikel has instituted. Do we loosen that? Should you demand for that to be loosened?
I think this all depends on your levels of patience as a football fan. If you want to win now and you want to... There's no guarantees, but if you want an absolute guarantee, then I think, you're leaning more towards that top percentile type. Let's say, usually the top percentile forwards in football, they have huge personalities, they have huge egos because they know they are the guy. They know it, right? But I don't believe Arsenal need to get the top percentile, the very best, to win the league. I think Arsenal can win the league by getting top quality. That still enables us to maintain the cohesion and the harmony that has been installed into this team from day one. I'm a person who is very much of the idea, and I think we both had the same thoughts here, where, like, Kylian Mbappe is a great example here, right? Yeah. I would not want Arsenal to sign Kylian Mbappe. And I know people will find that nuts. This is a player I absolutely love. Love him so much. But bringing a Kylian Mbappe, I think the effects that can have in terms of how big that player is as an individual and what he demands when things may go wrong, I think that can have really bad consequences of what happens to the club, bringing someone like that into the team, personally. And that's why I'm very much of the idea in which you bring a player in who is going to allow you to maintain that same level of cohesion and harmony. And by the way, there's so many players out there who have the beliefs, have the values that can come into this Arsenal team, maintain that ethos, but also give us that quality that can take us over the line. I don't believe it is the case of you need to go and get that personality because that guy is the best player. We need to bring him in. If there is the best player out there, but they have a huge personality and it's something that can cause disruption, that's a no for me. And I know people won't be able to process that because it's like, oh, well, I'm contradicting myself because I said, quality is what dictates at the top level. But it doesn't have to be like the very best players in the world. It just has to be sufficient quality to take you over the line. And I think there is more than enough sufficient quality in football that can get us over the line whilst maintaining the values and ethos that is installed into the club.
I firmly believe that teams need to recognize their superpower and play to it. And unfortunately, it's not flashy. People don't want to hear it, but our superpower is the press. Yeah. And it's what defines this Arsenal team as unique in eras, and what will define them as unique personally. Like the detail to which we organize our press, I think, is something that I haven't seen a sophistication to this degree in other teams before. And so that's why I kind of made the point of Semenyo versus Leao. We're talking about a player who I think is a top player. He's one of the Premier League's best attackers, but he's also somebody that's one of the most hardest working, humble forwards in the league, and is, your favorite word, tons of transferable skills. But undoubtedly, Leao is a maverick, a player with unbelievable potential, but has those worries out of possession. And what will Mikel do? Mate, I think that cultural non-negotiables is something that fans won't like hearing, but it's what defined Mikel's success in his rebuild. Yeah. He's not going to stray from that. Like at his core, there are things that he can work on as far as balance goes, platforming his wingers. These are things that you don't have to sacrifice non-negotiables for, but this culture, this playing the right way and earning the right to play and the right to win is something that I feel is a core to who makes him him. And that's just, if you don't like it, fair enough. I don't think George, he will.
I think what it is, George, it is a case of like, it's the level of patience you have. And sometimes fans think, we can only win if we have this player. That is the only way Arsenal can win. But as me, you, Alex, will mention many times, we rate this Arsenal team very highly in terms of how it is coached. We've talked about the flaws a lot, this season, critiquing a lot of things. But we back this team and what Mikel has built here. And I think that the Leao and Semenyo one's a really good one because it's like Leao has the better quality. But Semenyo has enough quality that can still allow Arsenal to achieve the goals. And this is the thing, isn't it? It's like, you might be sacrificing a little bit of the quality, but that quality is still really high. But you've got the fundamentals and the principles that allow Arsenal to still be fantastic at what they have been consistently at. And as you allude to, it is the press and it is the flexibility there. So.
Yeah, and I think one thing that people don't realize is, by the way, introducing a maverick, what does the team respond like to that? Not just Mikel. People keep asking the question about Mikel. What does the team respond to like that? Does Saka look at that and say, I've been doing this for 5 years and now suddenly you're going to accept this? I'm just asking the question. Like, he's got a contract extension coming up. I mean, you've made me do this. I don't know how you would feel. You've made me do this for 5 years, and now you're sitting there after preaching, this is how we win. This is the non-negotiable. This is a strong word, guys. For those of you listening, like, this is something we do not compromise on. And I see you buy a player that I think compromises on those principles. I think the dynamic in the dressing room and between the players is something that should be talked about a bit more than even Mikel. But, mate, I want to give you a chance to maybe search for a question. I do have one on the doc.
I've got a really good one on X, a little bit more of a fun one. And it's from Harry at Haj Mahal 96. He asks, would you rather go out to Real Madrid or beat them but lose to Villa in the semis?
100% go out to Madrid. You go out against the team that's the best.
Do you know what? It's kind of like, I think regardless of the outcome of the game against Madrid, Arsenal are going to learn a lot. We're going to learn a lot from it. And I think this team, we look at key moments, what that has defined our tenure under Mikel, you can look at certain games as being defining, like Manchester City at the Etihad losing 4-1. That's a big game in which, it allowed us to change our approach in the big games that has allowed us to have the success that we've had since then. And I think Madrid as well, regardless of what happens, this is a really good opportunity to face like the team in the Champions League. I cannot be there for Unai Emery again in a knockout competition. I will not be there.
That would actually be my nightmare. I'll be honest with you. I think that, especially this season, where we've been so unlucky, we've not had things go our way. That is the quintessential end to the season. Ironically, that's the story.
We've literally just beaten the boss, and then we lose to the old enemy again.
I like, what would describe this season more? It would be the Villa one. But no, and you know what? I'll go one step further. I think Madrid catapults us to the land of the casuals, and it changes the perspective. Yeah. A performance against Madrid with who we have out, and even Saka coming in, but without Kai, with having the injuries that we have, but a strong performance against this Madrid, it changes the landscape. And I think Arsenal's European campaign this season, mate, it's been phenomenal. People aren't deeping the record that we've had in the Champions League this year. And even last year, like, our record in the Champions League with Mikel far outweighs anything we've done in the Europa League, even though we were good in the Europa League. But if you look at the goals scored, some of the records we've made in the Champions League, mate, we've been top, ironically, in this competition.
I mean, we finished third in the table, and we conceded the fewest goals, barring Inter Milan, in the entire group. So scoring 7 goals against I know PSV were absolute bombs, but scoring 7 goals in a knockout stage competition, and this is a team that did beat Juventus as well. I know Juventus aren't having a good time, but it's
mate, people have beaten bums in the Champions League and they didn't make that record. So as far as I'm concerned,
that's true.
Hold it. You get what you deserve there. So very interesting one. 100% I'd rather lose to Madrid. No doubt in my mind, personally.
I agree.
Okay, we maybe have time for 2 more questions. I do have one from Imedine on Twitter, and then maybe I'll look for a Discord one a little bit after that. But Imedine on Twitter writes, as he had it and then lost it. But it was essentially, let me paraphrase, what are the tactical evolutions that you can predict might happen next season? So I think that's pretty broad. So I don't know how you feel about that, Rohan. Like, are we going to be more Man City? Are we going to be more Liverpool? Are we going to maintain our own style? Because we haven't seen the tactical evolution this year that we were owed. Yeah. So what do you think we're going to see?
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because I think it does dictate a lot on what we actually do in the window. I know that's a kind of cop-out question, but genuinely, like, you sign a certain player, let's say we sign 2 forwards that are going to start. Hands down, they're going to start. Depending on who those forwards is, will depend on what Arsenal do in terms of how they play. Like that's always been the driver, because when we look at the tactical evolutions that Mikel has had from the moment he's came through the door, it has been dictated a lot by the players that we have signed. And that has been consistent. What I would like to see, I don't know about evolution, because I think it's very difficult to answer that, but I maintain I really want us to use Declan Rice in the way that is going to allow him to be the best version of himself. On the ball. I think off the ball, what he does, it's a fantastic way to use him. But in terms of in possession, I'd like to see us do that more, and I'd like to see us have more emphasis on getting a Miles inside the block, getting Ethan more inside as well, and having players who are very much basics of football, 2 interiors, receiving inside, turning, committing players, and being able to create in that fashion. I think it's so simple, but it's so effective, and I would really like to see that. I'd like to see Miles get a lot more minutes in the middle of the park. It's not necessarily an evolution, but I think that can certainly bring a different way of playing in terms of how you create chances, which in itself is an evolution. So,
I think I'll be really specific. I think that transitions are going to be a completely different topic for Arsenal next year. Regardless of the type of attacking and I think the identity that we go through, I think Mikel's big focus is going to be transitions. I found this part of his conference, by the way. I think he did a little bit of the pep in which Chelsea are so good. But he called them the best attacking team in the league. And I think personally, one thing that Chelsea do very well is attack transitions. And I found it interesting if he believes them to be the best attacking transition team. Well, a best attacking team in the league. And given that their success had come from transitions and wide usage, I'm kind of interested to see whether or not that's a philosophy he'd like to adopt. So I have a feeling personally that we're going to be looking towards a different team in transition next year. So
that's really interesting, isn't it? Because for me, Chelsea aren't the best attacking team in the league.
I agree.
I mean, but
who are for you? Bournemouth?
As a collective? Are we talking?
Yeah.
Not as an individual, because I don't.
No, collective. I would say.
I think Newcastle are up there.
Yeah.
In terms of the collective, I think if they sign Brian Mbeumo as well, that's goodness me. I mean, if they kept Isak as well, Bournemouth are up there. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I flirt between. I think Newcastle. I think Forest are fantastic in transitions as well. I think they're fantastic, and I think the balance with Wood, Cho, and Elanga is a very...
Mate, I can't have Brian Mbeumo join Newcastle. I think that front line would be very scary.
George, what would you say is the best front line, balance-wise, in the world at the moment? What would you say?
Oh, God.
I'll tell you mine.
Okay,
Lewandowski, Yamal, and Rafinha. I think that is the most balanced, and what they've...
Yeah.
But Vinicius, Mbappe, and Rodrigo are developing something serious to turn the new year.
The tough thing between those two is I just think that Rafinha this season has gone atmospheric, and
he's Ballon d'Or level.
Yeah, mate. No, he's gone incredible. And you know what? Yeah. To be fair, I'm going to do this because you know what? We don't talk about this enough. My biggest mistake was not pushing for Rafinha as much as you.
Oh yeah, mate. But do you think he would have came though? Because I think he was dead set on Barcelona.
I don't. Look, ultimately, I think Barca was his dream. Yeah. But this is something that I didn't evaluate. I didn't think I was placing limits on Rafinha as far as what I would pay. I think I undersold him as far as my rating. I did not see this level of production. I saw a top player that I wanted to pay 55, 60 million max, but I had a limit. If you got beyond that, I was like, I don't think I would be comfortable. I think I undersold him. I think he was a 75 million player even back then on reflection.
I mean, I've certainly had my howlers in terms of transfer takes, right? But I've always wanted us to get Rafinha. Like, I genuinely, because I think when we talk about transferable qualities as well, he is an Arteta-type winger. In terms of his responsibilities off the ball as well, what he learned under Marco Bielsa, he would fit into this team like a glove. Genuinely. He's fantastic. And, man, that front line is... It's just like Lewandowski holding it. You've got Yamal making runs. You've got Rafinha making these direct runs. I'm actually really happy, though, in terms of football like this. A lot of football outside of the Premier League in terms of, like your front lines. You've got now Dembele, Barcola, Kvaratskhelia. Now you've got, although I know you're not too keen on Kvaratskhelia. I'm okay with him as well. But and then you've got Real Madrid, and then you've got this Barcelona front line. There's some serious talent at the front line.
If PSG get Osimhen, it will be the best in the world for me.
Yeah. And they get Konate at the back as well. Goodness me.
Mate, good God. Okay, one last question. I love this from Sparish on the Discord. Since this is more a tacto-y pod, what are your thoughts on a Nico Williams, Alexander Isaac, Zubamendi, and Garcia window? I know George has said he prefers Semenyo with Isaac, but how do you think Nico, Isaac, Havertz, Saka front four would work, and also rate that window out of 10? The reason I chose this question is I saw a lot of crazy stuff on the timeline about people thinking that's a 6. It's an average window. And I think Alexander Isaac on his own makes this a minimum 8 out of 10 window. Minimum. And look, just to clarify, like for me, I preferred Semenyo because of the profile type of winger, not necessarily between the two. But if I was to have a look at that window, mate, that is a 9 out of 10 window for me. Verging on an 8.5.
Easily.
Because... you've got one of the best goalkeeping prospects in the world being signed, Juan Garcia, that's going to be, we'll look back on that deal if we do it. It's going to be in the Gabriel level of debate between value for me. I think he is an incredible goalkeeper. And then Zubamendi, I'm not as high on. Everybody knows this for years. I think me and you have similar opinions.
Yeah, it's like you like him, but we don't. It's not like. It's like. Yeah, it's.
I'm not going to go and rep and be Zubamendi season, whereas I may have done that with some other players. But I will say that he's a good player. Tell him who you did it for. But yeah, as a whole, like, mate, like I'm looking at that and it solves every immediate need. The only thing that window doesn't have is the defender on the left-hand side, and it's because I think it's going to be the one thing that we may develop, where I think Kivior's gone, I think Kieran Tierney's gone, I think Zinchenko's gone. I think there's a lot of left-handed
we need someone, don't we? Going. Like you lose that many, you need someone.
Yeah, it's so like that window. Maybe that's why I go 8.5 for me. But mate, minimum, like where do you stand on that type of window? I mean, it gets your win now forward, the best win now forward in the league. I think that entire window you're looking at least at 260 million pounds spent across those 4 players. Yeah, where do you stand on that? Like, where do you rate on the window out of 10? And also, how do you think that front 4 does? I guess the question asked, I prefer Semenyo. How do you feel that the Nico Williams front 4 occurs with Nico, Isaac, Havertz, and Saka, for example?
Yeah, I think in terms of rating the window, it's a 9 out of 10 minimum for me, because as much as, you know, the left hand side, there are things we can do that we need that can elevate us there. The biggest driver has always been the quality across the front line, and you address that with that window, and that is what I wanted. You know, you also replace a Thomas Partey and a Jorginho going out with someone who, like I said, I like him. I don't love him, but he gives us things that we will lack in the absence of a Zinchenko, in the absence of a Jorginho, in the absence of a Thomas Partey as well on the ball. And that's what Zubamendi will give us. He may not be your favourite, but he certainly makes sense from a squad building purpose. So, and then the Juan Garcia, I'm not seeing much of him, but yeah, in terms of his stature and some of the moments that you see, and stylistically, again, he's giving us similar traits and qualities that David Raya gives us. Then it's a case of, well, whose ceiling is higher? And that's where you get into that conversation, don't you? But in terms of the front line, I do think with Alexander Isak, you're asking him to be that channel runner and having someone like Nico Williams who's then more of that creative force. I do like that dynamic, certainly. And that's why I've kind of been very... I also think, you know, with someone like a Benjamin Sesko, I think that would work well as well. With someone like... I'd probably say more like a Bradley Barcola, but it still works, you know, and I think it gives us a lot of option and depth there. So I do like that. I think with Kai Havertz, then he doesn't become a starter, guaranteed starter for me, you know, in terms of how that team evolves and becomes a team where you're trying to get everyone into the side. Like if you have Martin Odegaard and Mikel says he's your outright skipper and we are going to keep him in this team, we're building around him. You've got Saka there, you've got Alexander Isak there. Where there's only so many spots you can fill, isn't it? And I'm a massive Kai Havertz fan, so yeah, it's interesting.
The Alexander Isak buy has some interesting questions for one of Martin Odegaard and Kai Havertz, in my opinion. Along with Zubamendi, like those two alone as a window, I think it asks questions about somebody who's on 300K a week that's going to be more rotational, and whether that's sustainable long term. But that is a future question of the pod. Guys, thank you so much for sticking with us. As Asper said, it may be a little bit more of a tacto-y pod, but I love podding with you, Rod. I missed you. It's been too long since I've talked the Arsenal with my boys. So I love this. A quick reminder, guys, we do have the international break coming up, but we're going to have pods coming up. So we're going to probably do another rewatch. We're going to probably do another podcast if we can fit it. We're probably going to talk a little bit of schedules. And we will have pods coming out for you. So have a look at the schedule it's going to be releasing. And I think if you're hearing this in your ears, you're hearing this on a Tuesday, March 18th, and I hope you have a wonderful Tuesday. We love you guys so much. Thank you, Rohan.
Nice one, mate. Always a pleasure.
Amazing. Thanks, guys, for sticking with us, and thanks for keeping it Arsenal.